Perhaps you've heard that the definition of insanity is repeating the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Knock, knock. Banana. Knock, knock. Knock, knock. Banana. Knock, knock. Banana. Knock, knock. Orange. Aren't you glad I didn't say banana? When I was in the second grade, that was like the funniest knock-knock joke ever. Why was it so funny? Because you have to lull people into that idea that you're just going to go on saying banana forever. And then you pull the switch on them. It's so funny. Well, it is when you're 7, you know. And if your parents are good sports and other adults, they will laugh with you because, you know, you don't realize that this is not the first time they've heard that joke. And why is she telling us this? I'll get there. So yesterday was indeed Groundhog Day. And we are in this muddy time. In the 1980s, I knew this guy who he was big on Groundhog Day. He'd shave off half of his beard. I don't mean like he'd lower the volume of his beard. He'd shave half his face, like one side of his face, on Groundhog Day every year. And it was a shock for people who didn't know him. For those of us who knew him, it must have been Groundhog Day, you know. But it can be a little odd to see somebody walking down the street with a beard and mustache on one half of his face and a clean-shaven face on the other half. That's a big change. It's a big switch. It's a whole new thing. Why Groundhog Day? Why this time of year? Well, why do you think? I want to share with you some thoughts on this time of year from my dear friend and colleague, the Reverend Catherine Clarenbach. Yesterday, and before I get to that, I want to tell you, yesterday we know that Punxsutawney Phil didn't see his shadow, and so we're heading into this muddy time of year, and I thought this was a good time to share her words with you. She says, "There are so many ways to see Bridget, she in whose wake the snowdrops bloom, the smith who forges lives and teaches us the power of hard work and persistence, the bard, poet, and bestower of inspiration, the one who teaches us to listen to our inner wisdom and share our authentic voice, the healer who touches our hearts and bodies and helps us learn how to bridge across difference, to bless, to nourish, and to nurture. Goddess Bridget, Saint Bridget, Hearth Prognostication, Goddess Bridget and Saint Bridget. The goddess of the hearth, prognostication, and all these other things, right? It was my friend's authentic self to do this radical thing at the beginning of springtime, at this muddy time of year, to shave half his face, to start fresh. To make a change. I don't think he was prognosticating anything, but he was making a statement about moving out of winter and moving into spring. Now, how many of you have seen the Bill Murray movie, Groundhog Day? In case you haven't had a chance to stream it, one of the cable channels was actually streaming it over and over, which in itself is kind of meta yesterday. And I had a chance to watch it again. And Groundhog Day is kind of the perfect day for the story of this movie, in which Bill Murray plays like the most obnoxious weatherman on a TV news channel from Pittsburgh, right? He's a star, and he acts like he's a star in Pittsburgh, but he's like, I'm just the biggest guy around, and he's super obnoxious and really creepy. And they go to Puxatawny to, film the groundhog coming out and say a few words about that. And he gets stuck there, and he has to repeat the day over and over and over again. And he's on to this. He knows what's happening, but nobody else in the town knows that this is happening. Well, why is this happening to him? We are doomed to repeat history because no one listens the first time. Well, he didn't listen the first time, so he has to repeat this. And at first, he's really angry about it. And then he moves through being angry, and then he figures out, well, maybe he can make a lot of money doing this. But then he moves through all this, almost the stages of grief about being stuck in this one day that he can't get out of, while he continually makes the same mistakes over and over again until he finally learns. So here we are in this muddy time of year. And I want to ask you, what are the things that we have to learn? And what has that got to do with the goddess Bridget and Saint Bridget, and who, I could give you a lesson on how the goddess Bridget got conflated with Saint Bridget, and that would all be very interesting. But that's not really what we're here to do. I can tell you briefly that there probably was a real Bridget of Kildare. Well, it became Kildare after she got there, but there was already a goddess Bridget, and Bridget the Christian was a very holy person, and when she became a saint, they became conflated because they already had the same name probably. And they became associated with the same things. At this time of year, hearth, prognostication, caring for one another, smiths. She's the goddess of a lot of things and the saint of a lot of things. But why this time of year? Why this muddy time of year? And why prognostication? And what does that have to do with learning over and over again? Well, to predict the future, we really have to know something about the past, don't we? To predict the future, we have to know something about the past. Anybody invest in the stock market? A few of you. Do you just look at a company and say, I like that name, I'll put my money there? Or do you look at past performance and read things and say, based on past performance. Now, if you look at all the materials, everybody tells you, well, past performance is not a predictor of future earnings, right? Is not a predictor of future profits. But we also know that if a company has persistently done poorly, that's probably not where I'm going to put my money. The race is not always to the swift and the battle to the strong, but that's not the way to bet. I think my favorite philosopher, one of my favorite philosophers said that. It might have been Casey Stengel. Right? To prognosticate, to look to the future, we must look to the past. And so that's how that all ends up being tied in with Groundhog Day, with Imbolc and St. Bridget's Day, and incidentally, Candlemas, the time when the church would bless all the candles for the coming year. We don't do that here, but bless all the candles for the coming year. So what are the patterns? This is a good time to think about what are the patterns that we repeat without thinking about that we could learn from? What are the patterns that we repeat that we could learn from? I'm going to share something with you. I'm going to be vulnerable for a minute. I don't close things. Now, my husband had this habit of closing jars so tightly that nobody in the house could open them, right? So I barely put lids on things. Like, they're there, but it's almost like an abstraction, right? You know. So my daughter will say, "Oh, I noticed when I took this thing out of the refrigerator that you must have used it, and after I cleaned up the mess," because I picked it up by the lid, right? But because it was pointed out to me, and then we talked about it, I noticed that there are many things I don't close. I tend not to close my coat. I mean, they have zippers and buttons and things. I just tend not to zip them up. It's not because I came from Florida. I went to college in Albany, New York. It's cold and windy there. I have the ability to close my coat. I tend not to. Well, what's that about? That's a pattern I repeat. I could learn from that. I have learned that if I don't put lids on tightly enough, things spill out. I don't have to put them on so tightly that I need tools to remove them. But if I don't put them on tightly enough, it makes a mess. I can curse the cold, but I could zip up my coat. Maybe it comes from the time that I had a zipper that constantly got stuck, but I don't have that coat anymore. I have a coat with a working zipper now. I have learned to adapt to my current situation. What are the things that you need to learn to adapt to? It's that muddy time of year. What are the things that you are repeating that aren't working for you? Are there things that the congregation is doing together that aren't working for Channing anymore? What can we learn from the things that we do over and over? Are we expecting a different result? Now, sometimes we have to do things over and over just to do what? To get it right, to learn, to practice. Sometimes we have to repeat a thing because we're learning it. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about repeating something over and over again in order to learn it, to get it right. Now, that also happens in the movie Groundhog Day. Bill Murray figures out that since he's repeating this day over and over again, he has an opportunity to learn some things because he keeps getting better at the things that he's doing. So does anybody remember what it is that he learns to do really well by the end of the movie? Play piano. That's right. He has no idea how to play piano at the beginning of the movie, and by the end of the movie, he is a fabulous jazz pianist, right? Because if you repeat the same thing every day for a long time, if you put in many hours of practice, you get good at it. So sometimes we repeat things on purpose. How many hours, I'm putting you on the spot, so you don't, how many hours a day did you have to practice to become a good pianist, Stephen?
10,000 hours over time.
10,000 hours over time, right? So when we want to get good at something, we don't try it once and say, oh, I did it for an hour and I was not good, so forget that, right? We do have to practice, but sometimes we do the same things over and over again because they're habits and we expect a different result. And maybe we need to shed that practice. So in this muddy time of year, at Imbolc, at St. Bridget's Day, we have the goddess, the saint, the groundhog. Watching with us, being by us, reminding us that there is a hearth that anchors us. There are those who are with us and support us. There are those we can turn to for guidance, for love and support. I am inviting you to turn inward for a moment, to look at your own shadow, not to be afraid of it, and to say, what would it mean for you to shave half your face, or perhaps your whole face, to pop out of the mud like the snowbells, and move forward into the spring. What does the springtime hold for you?